Every single winter, across the United States, thousands of dogs freeze to death in backyards, alleyways, and abandoned properties. Sometimes they are strays, but very often they are owned dogs, left chained to a fence by people who either don't know how dangerous the cold is or simply don't care. For a guy named Mark, a 34-year-old warehouse worker living a few miles away, knowing this was happening was driving him crazy. Mark wasn't a millionaire. He wasn't the head of a massive animal charity. He was just a guy who drove to work every morning before the sun came up, blasting his truck's heater, looking out the window at the snowbanks and wondering how many animals were buried in them. He would call animal control when he saw a dog shivering on a short chain, but the shelters were always full. They were constantly operating over capacity. The wait lists were weeks long. The officers were doing everything they could, but there simply wasn't enough space, enough money, or enough manpower to save every dog from the freezing cold. Mark realized something very quickly. You don't need permission to fix what's broken in front of you. He couldn't take every dog into his 2-bedroom apartment. His landlord would evict him in a heartbeat, but he had to do something. He went to a big box hardware store, thinking he could just buy a few dog houses and drop them off in the neighborhoods where he saw the chained dogs. He walked down the lumber aisle and stopped in his tracks. A standard, moderately insulated wooden doghouse cost $250. Some of the nicer ones were pushing $400. He checked his bank account. He had maybe $50 of disposable income to his name until payday. Buying pre-made houses was completely out of the question. Building them from scratch out of wood wasn't much better. Lumber is expensive. Plywood is expensive. Shingles, nails, insulation foam, it all adds up fast. Plus, wooden dog houses sitting directly on wet winter ground eventually rot. They soak up the freezing moisture from the snow, they warp, they fall apart, and dogs end up chewing on the splintered edges. There had to be a better way, a cheaper way, something practically indestructible that could be assembled for next to nothing. The answer was sitting behind a local car wash, completely ignored, destined for a landfill. Mark was getting gas one afternoon when he saw a stack of massive, blue, heavy-duty plastic barrels sitting by the dumpsters. They were 55-gallon drums. He walked over and looked at them. The plastic was incredibly thick, designed to transport harsh industrial soaps, car wash chemicals, or bulk food ingredients like soda syrup and vegetable oil. Once the liquid is emptied, the companies usually have no use for the barrels. They just take up space. They have to pay waste management companies to haul them away. Mark found the manager of the car wash and asked what he planned to do with them. The manager said if Mark wanted to haul them off, he could take as many as he wanted for free. Mark loaded 3 of them into the bed of his truck. He didn't have a blueprint. He didn't really have any carpentry skills, but he had an idea. He brought the barrels home to his driveway and stood in the freezing cold looking at them. The first problem was obvious. A barrel is round. If you put a dog in it, and the dog shifts its weight, the barrel is going to roll over. It needed a base. Mark found some discarded wooden shipping pallets behind his own warehouse job. He broke them down, took the 2x4s, and screwed together a simple, heavy rectangular cradle. He laid the barrel on its side and wedged it into the wooden frame, securing it with a few heavy-duty screws from the inside out. Now, it was rock solid. It sat a few inches off the freezing ground, which was a crucial first step for insulation. The next step was getting the dog inside. Mark grabbed a jigsaw, drilled a pilot hole in one of the flat ends of the barrel, and slowly cut out a half-moon-shaped door. He had to use a sanding block to smooth down the edges of the thick plastic so it wouldn't cut the dog's skin as they climbed in and out. He stepped back. It looked like a dog house. It was waterproof, windproof, and practically indestructible, and it had cost him absolutely nothing but a few screws and an hour of his time. He was incredibly proud of himself. He gathered up an armful of old, soft cotton blankets from his closet, stuffed them through the door of the barrel to make a warm bed, and loaded the whole contraption into his truck. He knew exactly where he was going to put it. There was a house a few streets over where a German Shepherd mix was always chained to a fence, rain or shine, snow or sleet. Mark knocked on the door, told the skeptical owner he had a free, heavy-duty shelter for the dog, and the guy shrugged and let him set it up. Mark drove away feeling like a hero. But Mark was about to make a simple mistake with a pile of blankets that nearly cost a dog its life. 2 days later, the temperature plummeted again. A brutal mix of sleet and freezing rain coated the city in a sheet of ice. Mark drove by the house to check on the German Shepherd. He expected to see the dog happily curled up inside the blue plastic sanctuary. Instead, the dog was sitting outside in the sleet, shivering violently, refusing to go inside the barrel. Mark pulled over, ran up to the fence, and looked inside the barrel. The cotton blankets he had so carefully arranged were soaking wet and frozen solid. They were literally blocks of ice. Mark hadn't realized that dogs track snow and moisture inside on their paws and fur. When they lay on cotton blankets, towels, or dog beds, those materials act like sponges. They absorb the wetness from the dog. But because there's no heat source other than the dog itself, the moisture eventually freezes. The blanket becomes a refrigerator. The dog's body heat is rapidly sucked away into the frozen fabric, making them significantly colder than if they were just sitting on the bare ground. By giving the dog cotton blankets, Mark had accidentally built a death trap. He pulled the frozen blankets out, horrified. He went back home and started doing furious research on winter animal survival. He called a wildlife rehabilitator. He called a farm supply store, and they all told him the exact same thing. You never, ever use fabric. You use straw, not hay. Straw. This is a distinction that most people get wrong, and it is a matter of life and death. Hay is dried grass that still has the seed heads attached. It is food for horses and cows. Because it is food, it holds moisture, and because it holds moisture, it will freeze and mold just like a blanket. Straw, on the other hand, is the hollow, dried stalks left over after grain has been harvested. It is agricultural waste, but because the stalks are hollow tubes, they trap tiny pockets of air. When a dog burrows into a thick bed of straw, its body heat warms up the air trapped inside those hollow tubes. Furthermore, straw naturally repels moisture. The water from the dog's fur drains down through the stalks, leaving the top layer dry and incredibly warm. Mark drove out to a feed store on the edge of the county. He bought a massive bale of straw for $7. It was enough to fill 10 barrels. He drove back to the German Shepherd, packed the bottom third of the blue barrel with a thick, dense layer of golden straw, and stepped back. Within 5 minutes, the dog crawled inside, spun around 3 times, burrowed deep into the straw, and let out a long sigh. The hollow shape of the barrel was actually working in the dog's favor. Unlike a large, square wooden house with high ceilings where body heat escapes upward and dissipates, the curved ceiling of the barrel trapped the heat and pushed it right back down onto the dog. It was a perfect, self-heating microclimate. Mark put his hand inside the barrel an hour later. It was easily 30 degrees warmer inside than it was out in the wind. He had cracked the code, and he had done it for under $10. Before I keep going and tell you how this simple idea absolutely exploded across the country, I want to talk about resourcefulness for a second. Mark saw a massive problem, looked around at the literal garbage people were throwing away, and engineered a high-value solution out of thin air. He used his time, his hands, and his brain to create something out of nothing. That exact mindset is the foundation of building real wealth. If you are tired of trading your time for a paycheck that barely covers your bills, and you want to learn how to spot opportunities that other people walk right past, you need to look into the Print Money at Home program. It is a comprehensive blueprint that teaches you how to build real, sustainable income from your living room. It breaks down various entrepreneurial methods, side hustles, and digital businesses that require minimal upfront capital but have massive upside potential. It is about learning the mechanics of making money work for you, so you finally have the freedom to dictate your own life, your own schedule, and maybe even have the resources to fund the causes you care about. If you want to stop watching your bank account drain and start building multiple streams of income, there is a link down below. It will change the way you look at making a living. Now, back to Detroit. Mark went back to the car wash. He asked the manager for 10 more barrels. The manager laughed and pointed to the back lot. He told Mark he could take 50 if he had the truck space. Over the next 3 weekends, Mark turned his tiny backyard into a manufacturing line. He broke down pallets, he cut holes in thick blue plastic, he sanded edges, and he stuffed them with straw. He started driving around the most neglected neighborhoods in the city, knocking on doors where he saw dogs shivering in the snow. He didn't judge the owners. He didn't yell at them. He knew that anger wouldn't get a roof over the dog's head. He simply smiled, said he was doing a community project, and asked if their dog would like a free, insulated winter house. 99% of the time, the owners said yes. They were often struggling to pay their own heating bills. They loved their dogs, but they just didn't have the means to protect them. But Mark couldn't do it alone. The city was too big, the winter was too long, and there were thousands of dogs out there. So, he took a few pictures of his finished barrel houses and posted them on a local community Facebook page. He explained exactly how he made them. He listed the materials: barrel, pallets, screws, jigsaw, straw. Total cost, maybe $5 or $10 if you had to buy the screws. He wasn't asking for donations. He was asking for hands. He posted the location of his house and said he was going to be building all day Saturday if anyone wanted to come help. He expected maybe 1 or 2 people to show up. On Saturday morning, Mark walked out his front door and found 25 people standing in his driveway. There were guys with pickup trucks holding circular saws. There were grandmothers carrying boxes of heavy-duty screws. There were teenagers asking what they could do to help. A local bakery had dropped off 3 boxes of donuts and 2 gallons of hot coffee. Someone else had gone to the feed store and bought 10 bales of straw. It was absolute chaos in the best possible way. They set up assembly stations. The teenagers broke down the pallets and pulled the old nails out. The guys with the power tools cut the doors and built the wooden cradles. The grandmothers sanded the rough plastic edges down until they were smooth as glass. By 4 in the afternoon, Mark's front lawn was covered in 45 bright blue, heavily insulated dog houses. They loaded them into a convoy of pickup trucks and spent the rest of the evening distributing them across the city. Every single house found a dog in need before the sun went down. This is the part of the story where things usually fade out. A nice weekend project, a feel-good local news segment, and everybody goes back to their normal lives. But the internet has a funny way of taking a good idea and throwing gasoline on it. Photos of Mark's driveway assembly line started getting shared. Not just in Detroit. They got shared to animal rescue groups in Chicago, in Cleveland, in Philadelphia. Suddenly, Mark was getting messages from people thousands of miles away asking for the blueprints. He had to sit down at his kitchen table and draw a diagram on a piece of notebook paper, take a picture of it with his phone, and upload it to the internet. The Barrel House Project, as it started to be called, wasn't an official charity. It had no board of directors. It had no bank account. It was entirely decentralized. It was just a set of instructions spreading like wildfire among people who were sick of seeing animals suffer. In Pennsylvania, a group of off-duty firefighters took the idea and modified it. They realized that in extreme blizzard conditions, the wind could blow snow straight through the front door of the barrel. So, they went to a hardware store, bought heavy, clear vinyl strips, the kind you see hanging in the doorways of commercial freezers, and screwed them to the top of the barrel opening. It created a flexible flap. The dog could push right through it, but it kept the wind and the blowing snow completely out. It was a massive upgrade, and they immediately shared the modification back to the network. The design was evolving in real time, crowdsourced by everyday people trying to solve a problem. In Ohio, a high school shop class saw the project online. The shop teacher scrapped his lesson plan on building birdhouses and told his 30 students they were going to build barrel houses instead. They contacted a local syrup distribution plant, which happily donated 60 empty barrels just for the tax write-off. The teenagers learned how to use power tools, how to measure and cut wood, and how to work as an assembly line. When they were done, they donated all 60 houses to a rural animal rescue that had been taking in strays from the freezing countryside. But as the movement grew, they hit a massive wall. The conflict didn't come from a lack of volunteers. It came from bureaucracy. As hundreds of these blue plastic barrels started popping up in front yards and driveways across various cities, local code enforcement officers started issuing citations. Some city ordinances strictly regulate what kind of structures can be placed in residential yards. To a zoning officer with a clipboard, a repurposed industrial chemical barrel sitting on wooden pallets wasn't a life-saving shelter. It was unpermitted trash. It was an eyesore. fines started rolling in. Homeowners who had gladly accepted the free shelters were suddenly being told they had to pay a $200 fine or throw the barrel away. In one city in Indiana, a code enforcement department threatened to confiscate dozens of the barrel houses and take them to the dump. The volunteers were furious. They were spending their own money, using their own weekends, doing the city's job by keeping animals from freezing to death on the sidewalks, and the city's response was to threaten them with fines. This is the moment where a lot of grassroots movements die. The red tape just gets too thick, and people give up. But you don't need permission to fix what's broken in front of you. Instead of backing down, the builders mobilized. They didn't just complain on the internet, they showed up to city council meetings. In that Indiana town, 30 volunteers packed the small government room, carrying one of the barrel houses right through the double doors and setting it down in front of the mayor's podium. They brought a veterinarian to testify about the exact core body temperature at which a dog's organs begin to shut down. They brought statistics from the local animal control showing how many tax dollars were spent disposing of frozen animal carcasses every winter. They didn't ask for funding. They didn't ask for a parade. They simply asked the city council to amend the blight ordinance to officially recognize insulated agricultural and industrial barrels as legitimate, temporary winter animal shelters. Faced with overwhelming public pressure, undeniable logic, and a room full of very angry voters, the city council caved. They passed the amendment. Other cities soon followed suit, creating specific exemptions for the barrel houses during the winter months. The hurdle was cleared, and the operation scaled up faster than anyone could have imagined. What started in Mark's driveway with a jigsaw and a few pallets morphed into a highly organized underground supply chain. Volunteers mapped out every industrial facility within a 100-mile radius. They figured out that pickle factories used massive amounts of white food-grade barrels. They found out that bulk soy sauce distributors had heavy red barrels. They coordinated with trucking companies who offered to backhaul empty barrels to central build locations for free, just because the drivers wanted to help out. They optimized the build process to the point where a trained team of 4 people could fully assemble, insulate, and weather strip a barrel house in under 8 minutes. Then came the Texas freeze. A few years after Mark started his project, the state of Texas was hit with a catastrophic, unprecedented winter storm. The power grid failed. Millions of people were left in the freezing dark, and down south, where it almost never snows, nobody had winter dog houses. The culture of keeping dogs outside year-round was incredibly prevalent, and suddenly, temperatures were dropping into the single digits. Animal rescues in Texas were putting out desperate, panicked calls for help. Dogs were literally freezing to death on their chains by the thousands. The ground was too frozen to even bury them. Up north, the Barrel House Network heard the call. They had the inventory, they had the skills, and they knew exactly what to do. Within 48 hours, groups in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania organized massive transport relays. Volunteers rented U-Haul box trucks, packed them to the ceiling with pre-built barrel houses and bales of straw, and drove in shifts through the blizzard conditions down to Texas. When they arrived in Dallas and Houston, it was a war zone. The northern volunteers hit the streets with local Texas rescues, cutting chains, stuffing straw into barrels, and working by the headlights of their trucks in the freezing rain. They distributed over 2,000 barrel houses in less than a week. It wasn't enough to save every dog, but for the 2,000 dogs that climbed into those warm, dry, insulated plastic drums, it was the difference between life and death. This whole movement is a testament to the fact that waiting for a massive, heavily funded institution to solve a problem is usually a recipe for disaster. The government moves too slowly. The big charities are stretched too thin. The real change, the immediate, ground-level impact, always comes from ordinary people who look at a broken system and decide to hack together a solution with whatever they have lying around. It comes from looking at a piece of industrial trash and seeing a sanctuary. It comes from realizing that action is the only thing that actually moves the needle. You don't need permission to fix what's broken in front of you. It's Tuesday night in Detroit again. The wind is still howling off the lake. The snow is still piling up against the chain-link fences. It is -4 degrees, and the air hurts to breathe. But in the alleyway behind that boarded-up auto shop, things look a little different. Sitting securely on a heavy wooden frame is a bright blue plastic barrel. Inside, past the heavy vinyl flaps keeping the wind out, that nameless pit bull mix is not shaking anymore. He is buried deep in a thick bed of golden straw. The heat from his own body is trapped against the curved roof of the barrel, wrapping him in a cocoon of warm, dry air. He is sleeping soundly, completely oblivious to the deadly cold just inches away on the other side of the plastic. All because a guy in a warehouse refused to accept that things just had to be the way they were. If you thought this story was worth hearing, hit the subscribe button. It helps me tell more stories about the people fighting quietly in the background to make things better. And if you want to see what happens when someone applies this exact same DIY resourcefulness to building an off-grid home out of literal shipping containers, click the video right here on the screen. It is an absolutely wild build, and I will see you over there.